I think it's important to have a safe space like that, and the Financial Writers gives us that. A safe space to talk about issues with my colleagues. A place where I can meet people who on the outside world are my competitors. But here, when I talk about a safe space, being able to interact with competitors as human beings, where we're not competing, where we're colleagues, that's very important. But that would be true for anybody who joins the organization. For me personally, I've always been a ham, and it enabled me to overact on stage in the Financial Follies, which is the reason I originally joined, because they told me in order to be on that stage, I had to be a member of the association. There used to be a tradition, no longer is, but there was a tradition, that the president of the association not only had to be in the show, but had to have a solo in the show. And in 1998, I was the president of this association, and I had to have a solo in the show, which caused a major problem for the director, who at that time was Jerry Goldstein, and for the guy who wrote the show, who at that time was Jeff Grigsby of Forbes. I, of course, found out about all of this later, what I'm telling you. Is they said, okay, Houston, we've got a problem. Claudia can't sing. We're not going to embarrass her by giving her a solo. What are we going to do? And one of them, I don't know which one, got the idea that, you know who had that problem also? Rex Harrison. He couldn't sing. Let's take one of his songs from My Fair Lady, which we didn't know about rapping then, but which he rapped. And we're going to give it to her. So they took Let a Woman in Your Life. I don't know if any of you remember that song, but Let a Woman in Your Life, and your life is filled with strife. And they rewrote it. That year, and interestingly enough, her name was also Claudia. Claudia Kennedy became the first female, I don't remember if it was 4-star general or 5-star general, but big shot general in the Army. So they dressed me up in uniform, and I was Claudia Kennedy, and they wrote the song, Let a Man into Your Tank, and you'll discover that he shrank, and it went steadily raunchier from there. It was, the reason I remember it so well, the Follies had never done a raunchy show before. There were gasps in the audience. It was a total showstopper. None of this is me bragging, I didn't write it, but people were so stunned to hear these risque lyrics, and I was delighted to deliver them. So yes, that is by far, no close second, my favorite Follies.
One of the advantages of being a member of the Financial Writers, in addition to the fun we had and the camaraderie, is the ability to meet and interact with other journalists. And over the years, as I rose and became an editor and executive, I was able to hire people because I knew not only their professional work, but I knew their personal attributes from getting to know them socially and through the Financial Writers. So that was a great thing that I think, and I think it's helped people over the years. Many people have gotten their jobs because of contacts they made as being members of the Financial Writers. When I became a reporter on the Times, I had one story to write, and I could go out for lunch, sometimes a leisurely lunch. Other people did 3 martini lunches, I didn't do that, but I have been with people who did. But you could do it because you go out to lunch. A deadline then those days was 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, and you had plenty of time to write a story in the afternoon, even if you hadn't done any legwork before. Or frequently the lunch was developed into a story. So it was much more leisurely than it is now, with 24-hour news, 24-hour social networks, and the pace is much, much different. So it was an easier time, I should say. One of the things that I enjoyed particularly in Financial Writers was running a series of luncheons. I did that for a number of years, and I had some of the most important people in American business as guests. The head of General Motors, the head of W.R. Grace, the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, et cetera, et cetera. And we would do monthly luncheons. Occasionally we'd do a breakfast, and it was with a business leader or even a government leader. Those were great fun, and people could get away from their desks and attend for a luncheon, because the luncheon would last from the time we gathered to the time it was over, 12 to 2. So you figure it was 3 hours out of your day. It generally was in Midtown New York. Frequently did at the restaurant Gallagher's in the theater district. And that was great fun because we had the opportunity to meet these people in a rather informal session. We didn't expect them to deliver great speeches, but the Q&A was always very interesting and quite stimulating. And sometimes, and frequently actually, it resulted in news.
I'm really proud of the New York Financial Writers Association. The organization goes back to 1938, and it's had some really stellar people involved in it, in management. We've also given awards to some of the very best people in financial journalism. If I may take a moment to tell you some of the spectacular names of people who won the Elliott Bell Award over the years, going backwards: John McCrory, Dan Hertzberg, John Huey, Jim Stewart, Gretchen Morgensen, Ellen Sloan, Barney Clommie, Jane Bryant Quinn, Matthew Winkler, Paul Steiger, William Woolman. I could go on and on. The point is that we have honored some of the very best people in journalism. That's one of our functions. Another function is to provide scholarships to undergrad and graduate students in financial journalism in Metro New York, and give them a leg up. And I've talked to some of the recipients, and they're very grateful for the help. It's allowed them to complete their degrees, and some of them are now themselves successful financial journalists. So we are seeding the next generation, and that's something to be really proud of. You know, being a part of the New York Financial Writers Association over the past 30 years has been important to me, and on many levels. One is just being part of the cast of the Follies. I've had a lot of fun, as well as the programs of the Financial Writers Association. I'm on a board now. I'm the vice chair of the program committee. We just put on a program last week about the candidates' positions on healthcare, which was very satisfying and meaty. So that's just yet another thing we do at the Financial Writers. I feel as though we're carrying on a grand tradition that goes back to 1938, and I want to be part of that. One of my most memorable Follies experiences was actually a song I wrote about the Enron debacle, and it was about Ken Lay, who was the chairman of Enron, was disgraced, and it was to the tune of Honesty by Billy Joel. And I used the word honesty. It was like, honesty is such a useful word. I employ it all I can. Honesty can get a little blurred, but that is all part of the plan.
I think journalism is the best teacher in the world because it teaches you to explore and look into and develop reactions to certain functions. And when you do that, you're educating yourself to a point. The association is important because it brings everything together and helps them to learn and study and examine and know. And in that way, you yourself benefit because your life is expanding. All I know is that in life, whether it's an association, whether it's a bank, whether it's a school, whether it's a business, everything has to have cohesion. And when you have cohesion and you broaden your own horizon, then you're lucky because you're learning.
Association is always there. I think that is one of the privileges of membership. It's always there. It's like a it's like your alma mater, except I, haven't graduated, still a member, but a great alma mater will always welcome you back and will always try to help you. It's like kind of like your family forever. And I feel that way with the New York Financial Writers Association. A lot of things have changed. So many things have changed in the financial industry. So many things have changed in media. And then we had COVID, things like that. So, the New York Financial Writers Association is still reaching out to people, to members. Hey, we're doing this by Zoom. We're gonna do this, but it's going to be on a more limited basis. It's still there, and I feel very good about it. And of course, I have friends in the who are members. So it's a very welcoming place. When I started doing business news on a daily basis in the 1990s, yes, there were women in finance. There are a lot more of them now. There were women who were reporting business news. There's a lot more of them now. And so it was like any place where you can find comfort and like a home, a professional home, and learn and to learn from people who had been in the industry for many years, decades before. I mean, Myron Kendall, everybody has benefited from his knowledge and his accessibility. And of course, he is just one of the many greats at the New York Financial Writers Association. But I think I felt when I joined it and then became more active in it, that I was more credible too. I was reporting daily, and it was quite visible, on CNBC and on CNN. But this was just another way that I could even just after hours to talk about stories, and say, wow, did you understand what the Fed chairman was saying, today? Or I didn't realize that company was so laden with debt, until we saw the quarterly earnings. It's just things you talk about. I suppose if you're a car mechanic, you talk about the latest Ford F1, truck that came out, or EVs. But in this case, you had a place where you could really talk about that. You couldn't talk about at ease with many other people, just in general. A lot of my friends, a lot of great sources on Wall Street, no question about it. But this was, my peers who were reporters.
Well, I've been a member of the association for 60 years. And it's been tremendous for me. I'm so glad that I joined. When I started at the New York Times, like my second day in the office, one of the assistant editors came over to me, and he was active in the association. And he says, "You want to join the association, don't you?" And I said, "I sure do." And I did. And, by being a member of the association, I felt that I've made a contribution to the field of financial journalism. That I've helped to further the education of young journalists through the scholarship program. We've had our own educational sessions where I've learned so much about different aspects of financial journalism, and I've been able to bond with my peers from different organizations, and we've had a wonderful relationship. It's been collegial. We're still competitive when we go after stories, but it's collegial when we're after hours. Well, if I was starting a student journalist, I would encourage them to go into financial news. There is so much going on these days, and everybody is interested in it. With mutual funds and exchange traded funds and 401ks, it seems a huge percentage of the population is in one way or another invested in securities, stocks, or bonds, mutual funds. So there's so much going on that they could write about. And they could, today, I believe stories are more analytical than they were when I first started. When I first started, it was just the facts, ma'am. Just read the facts, subject, verb, what happened. Now there's a tendency, and it's a good tendency, to explain why this happened, why a company's earnings were much lower than expected, why a new law will affect people's savings account. This analysis is very important, and this gives the young journalists a chance to shine. This is how they can shine, by really studying what's going on, speaking to as many people in the field as possible, reading a tremendous amount, books, articles, texts, and then presenting to the audience a good analysis of what is happening in a certain aspect of financial journalism. There's a lot of opportunity there. I think young people ought to grab it.
Importance, I would say, of being in a networking group like the New York Financial Writers Association is more important today than it was even, say, 10 or 20 years ago. So it's very important in an atmosphere where it's not what you know, it's who you know, to know people. So you can be the world's greatest journalist, but if you sit at home and only access people through the website, you're just not going to get ahead, in my opinion. I have been a member on and off since about the early 1990s with the New York Financial Writers Association. I was the president in 2007, an active Follies participant. I would say it's a good specialty to get into the financial journalism area, as everybody needs to know what's happening with their markets, with their 401k, with their savings. It's a relatively steady part of the profession, and also it's quite important. I mean, it's never slow. Well, sometimes it's slow, but rarely dull. There's always something going on, and it's really matters to your bottom line. And what you learn at work, you can apply to keeping your own investment safe, and you know what's happening. If the stock market slides 5%, you're aware of that. So you're aware of an awful lot of things that affect your own bottom line when you come home and you look at your 401k.
Financial news touches people in ways that I don't think they understand necessarily. So if you want to be in a field that you can have an impact and don't get too jaded about it because you may not feel it right away, understand that you are having an impact. You are having influence on how the debate and how the discussions are structured and how people understand the world that they live in on a very individual level, as well as a very high level macro scale as well. So what happens at the New York Financial Writers Association? Well, you can have a mixture of all those people. It's a place where there's a forum for people to discuss, a forum to get together. Maybe a columnist had been a reporter and vice versa. And you can, kind of in a relaxed atmosphere, have a discussion. But it's also a place where serious debate occurs. And over the generations of financial journalists that have participated in the nation's oldest business journalism organization, it was created in 1938 in New York. It's a place that has seen some of the greats in the journalism industry, in the business, as members, as productive members.
Well, being a part of the Financial Writers, as a member, as you said, as a member, serving on the board, and as an officer, helped me immensely in my career, especially not only as a journalist when I was at Business Week and U.S. News and World Report, but it helped me especially when I became director of the Night Badget program. I learned leadership skills by just participating in the organization. I gained leadership skills. I learned how to do some public speaking, how to teach, and fundraising. Fundraising was a big part of what the Financial Writers does ongoing, and it was certainly a big part of my career too there. But I think even more important than my how my career was I was personally benefited by being introduced to so many wonderful people have been mentors for me. They've become lifelong friends. Many of them I'm still in constant contact with, even though I live in Las Vegas most of the time. I now have friends on Facebook who I've known for most of my life, and just to name a few. I mean, the people that come to mind: Britt Tunick and Jane Riley, Joyce Bartonis, who are the dedicated people who have kept this organization going for decades. We're still friends on Facebook. I've got Folly's friends have now become my Facebook friends. Peggy Price, Amy Friedman, Susan Lisovich, Lisa Yap, Judy Glass. You remember these people: Bob Kozma, Richard Chang, and of course our colleagues, Greg at Business Week, are the very talented Ray Hoffman and Peter Coy.
Right.
You
That's
know,
right.
we're still in contact. And I also have to give a special shout out to Lenny Sloan, who all women in the organization need to thank, because it was under his tenure as president that women were actually allowed to join the organization. I have to say that the single most important thing that I have gotten out of the financial writers is my friendship with Mike Kendall. Mike Kendall has guided me in my career. He's been an incredible personal friend. And again, I say that the single most important thing, the single best thing that happened to me as a member of the financial.
When I joined the financial writers, as I mentioned, I was part of the team of the Wall Street Journal's broadcast division at Dow Jones. And after a few years there, it was time to look at some other opportunities along the way. And Rudy Ruderman, whom I mentioned before, had mentioned that they were looking for a writer at Standard & Poor's. I interviewed there, and the man who interviewed me said, "Oh, I've heard some good things about you," and said, mentioned Bob Dallas's name, whom I mentioned earlier. So I called Bob afterwards. I said, "I didn't even realize you were aware that I was interviewing. I appreciate it very much." He said, "Not a problem." He said, "There are a couple of other things if you're interested." He said, "This one I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, but the New York Post is looking for financial writers." I thought, okay, move into print, why not? I didn't think the business section was all that bad. In fact, it was quite good at the time, and became even better when Gerard Bray took over a couple of years later, our late president as well. And Bob said to me, "If you're interested," he said, "why don't you contact Bob Shabazian at the American Stock Exchange? Bob knows more than I do." And so I did. And I knew Bob a little bit from the Follies because he handled the props every single year. And we weren't friends as such at that point there, but I knew. And so Bob gave me all the information. And Bob calls me up about 10 days later. He said, "Have you heard anything yet?" And these are the days where all the correspondence was done by the U.S. mail. There was no, there were phones, but there were just desk phones. There was no voicemail. There was no email. Certainly no cell phones. Nothing. Bob calls me up about 10 days later. "Have you heard anything?" "No, Bob, I promise you, if I hear anything, I'll let you know." Calls me up one more time. I said, "Oh my God, I can't get rid of this guy." Good intentions. He said, "Have you heard anything?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, that may be good." He said, "We're looking to bring in somebody to run broadcasting here at the American Stock Exchange. Looks like your background would fit. Would you be interested?" I said, "Sure." And indeed, I got that job. So there were connections there from Bob Dallas, Bob Shabazian, Rudy Ruderman has set that up. So that was really quite helpful. And then along the, other jobs along the line too. So that's, you owe your career to that, because everything I've done since is based on it. But I've had lifelong friendships through it. I even got engaged after a Follies cast party. We had one back in February of 2000, and I brought my date. And I already knew before the night that that's what I wanted to do. And we were at 35th Avenue. I forgot maybe that was even what it was called at the time. And we drove back to my place in Brooklyn, and I stopped at the Brooklyn Promenade. And I don't know why she got out of the car on a cold February night at midnight when she doesn't like cold weather and doesn't like to be out late. And I proposed to her, but that was linked also to, New York Financial Writers event as well.
I joined the New York Financial Writers Association in 1964 as a business and financial reporter at the New York World Telegram and Sun. I had actually joined the New York World Telegram and Sun in 1959 and joined as a copy boy, about which I am still very proud. And then I eventually became a clerk in the financial department and eventually became a reporter. And my colleagues on the financial desk immediately told me that as soon as I was eligible to become a member of the New York Financial Writers Association, they were going to bring me into the organization. And they were absolutely spot on, because my memory is that the very day I was eligible, I was filling out paper, and I was very excited about it. And to me, the New York Financial Writers Association, from day one right through today, is a place where you build great relationships, great friendships, and you have at your immediacy mentoring. I can tell you that when I first joined the association, I was a young kid. I was in my early 20s. And as soon as I became a member of the association, as soon as I asked people questions about how to be a better journalist, how to do what I needed to do, there was always somebody immediately available, whether it was a colleague from my own New York World Telegram, or, if you will, competitors. Because one of the things is that at the New York Financial Writers Association, while you may be competitors, quote, during the day, close quote, when you are together at the association, those differences or that competition immediately melts away, and you just become really good friends. So the New York Financial Writers Association has always been, if you will, has been family. And despite all the changes that have occurred over the years, right up on through artificial intelligence, okay? It's still a place where you can build relationships, build friendships, learn from others who have expertise that perhaps you don't have, or have some knowledge that will help you be a better journalist. And people in the association are still sharing with one another. So despite all the changes, the very core of the organization has remained the same. It's family. Once you become a member of the New York Financial Writers Association, you can go to almost anybody and get help and guidance, and at the same time build enormous relationships.
I guess the friendships that developed come holidays, there's no way that I would miss sending my wishes to Art Szymanski. Alan Wax is on my Facebook account. I mean, it's the friendships and the camaraderie that develop that still, hold true. I mean, I was back and forth with emails to Claudia the day before she died. So it's things like that you can't replace those kinds of business friendships. It be the luncheons that we used to hold and the people that I got to meet because of that. I mean, we had some wonderful speakers, and our luncheons were always held at Gallagher's Steakhouse. That was intriguing to me. Maybe I had stars in my eyes, whatever. I was much younger, but I was impressed by the people that I met. The incident that happened. It was oh God, I can't remember his name. He was the new head of, was it the Teamsters Union or the UAW? And he walked in and, introduced himself and, yeah, nice to meet you. And in walks his henchmen. And they were with the real pointed toe shoes. And there were two of them. And when they said to me they were with him, and it came right out, I couldn't help it. I looked and I said, I know. I mean, it was so evident.
Every time I look at a Follies book, I have a wonderful memory.
I started with the organization after I moved from Associated Press to Business Week, and Ray Hoffman, who was the voice of Business Week, the radio presence of Business Week, and a very active member of the financial writers and very active in the Financial Follies, encouraged me to join the cast of the Follies. And I did, quickly got heavily involved, started writing most of the show actually for a good long time, and performing as well. So for me, the Follies has been 30 years now of very active involvement in the Financial Writers Association.
One year we did a Margaret Thatcher spoof, and we had Chippendale dancers behind Margaret. Actually, I think it was a man who actually had the role. I'm trying to think who played that particular character of Margaret Thatcher. But anyway, we were all dressed in Chippendale outfits. We had these spandex pants on, and above the waist, the only thing we had were bow ties. And Steve Gavoni, who's quite talented, was supposed to lead that line, and basically I would follow who was in front of me. But Steve has seen before and hurt himself and could not participate in that. This is the dress rehearsal, and I remember our director, no, not our director, our choreographer, down below looking shocked to see me front of the line. I was even more shocked at that. Luckily it was the dress rehearsal. I watched her movements, we got through it, and we made adjustments for the show itself.
I mean, just one, I don't know why this sticks out in my mind. I can't even tell you who the reporter was who played the part. But in one particular scene, the idea was to take a prop gun and shoot the bad guy. And no matter how hard the trigger was pulled, the prop simply would not work. And so right on the spur of the moment, whoever was supposed to be the gun handler, if you will, ran over to the bad guy and started to make believe he was beating him over the head with the gun. I mean, it was the ad-lib stuff, it was the crazy stuff that happened on stage that made everything so funny. On the other hand, there was the audience. And that's where it really got interesting, because the ballroom was packed with C-suite people and associates and PR guys, and the scripts were really sharp scripts. All the scripts were written by members of the association. So it wasn't like we had some scriptwriter who came in to do this. It was an internal process. And the barbs and all the attacks, if you will, about people, products, services. The coals, let me put it this way, not only did we take them over the coals, but the coals were really hot.
Oh my, Greg, there have been so many memorable Follies experiences. I think the best part of being in the Follies was being in the rehearsals. Those, we would get together twice a week. I mean, it was so much fun. Seriously, a lot of fun. Lots of Cat's Deli dinners. But I suppose for anyone who was around back in the late 80s or early 90s, I am probably most remembered for the role I played as Marla Maples, singing to Donald Trump on top of a grand piano.
One of our longest serving members who was in the Follies, he used to joke that he spent 50 years on Broadway, but he couldn't sing, dance, or act. His name was George Auerbach, who had been predecessor of mine on the New York Times, then went into public relations. And George was a faithful a participant in the Financial Follies and had a great time. And he always did a great job on stage, even though he couldn't sing, dance, or act. Originally, we didn't have women members. I don't think we had women members until the early 70s. And so during the Financial Follies, guys would dress up in drag. And some of these guys looked pretty good in drag. One in particular was a guy named Jerry Sherman, who was had been a reporter for the Journal of Commerce, later had his own PR firm, and then was a corporate PR executive. Jerry was a very good-looking guy, and particularly when he was dressed up and had a lot of makeup on or whatever. And the story was that this financial editor of a major newspaper had a little too much to drink and really came out onto Jerry Sherman. And Jerry never appeared in the Financial Follies again. He refused to do it.
The association is different today from when I first joined. The association has always followed trends in journalism. So the association is different in the ways journalism is different. When I joined it, I can assure you there was no such thing as an online presence. Now, of course, it's not only online, but it is encouraging people to tweet the follies. But it's basically following the trends. It's, in a funny sort of way, many young people see it as less necessary because they do so much online. I see it as more necessary today because people are doing so much online that the chance to meet each other and to fraternize is less and less. It plays less of a central part in the lives of many of its younger members. I hope that changes, and if there's anything I can do to change it, I will, because in my, God, am I going to make myself sound ancient, but in my day, there were such things as press conferences. You know, when you were covering news, there was no such thing as call it up on the web and live stream it. You had to go to a hotel and sit there and listen to Jack Welch deliver GE's quarterly earnings. So the people you sat next to were your competitors and colleagues, and you got to meet your news sources. I think you need this association more than ever for that. When I say the association has changed with professional trends, that goes into how the profession of financial journalism has changed, which it has changed very, very much. One way that it's changed I hate, which is deadlines used to be measured in terms of hours. If news broke at 10:30 and you worked at the New York Times, your deadline was 5:30 that night. You had time to think through a story. You had time to decide who your news sources were going to be. You had time to figure out what the ramifications were. Today, if news breaks at 10:30, you better have it on the web by 10:33, or else the Wall Street Journal has scooped you, and you know, there's hell to pay.
I had quite a long stint of freelancing with the New York Post, and that was in addition to my full-time job as senior bond reporter at Market News International, and I would write Sunday pieces for the New York Post, and so really thousands of dollars of income. I mean, I was able to do freelancing for them for 13 years. I mean, through one tip from the New York Financial Writers Association. So, and also some other fairly lucrative assignments also. But besides that, just a nice crowd of people to hang out with, and you know, they buy you drinks, they give you snacks in case you're hungry. I mean, you exchange numbers, you meet some people who can advance you in your career. I mean, what's not to love? And then once you've been there for a little while, you can apply for the Edward Switnicki grant, where they pay for you to go get, say, a college course on, say, video editing or this or that. I mean, it's an extraordinarily generous proposition. That's why I really strongly advise people to go for the club.
Business journalism is something that is a niche. It's something that's vital to our existence. It's vital to the economy. It's vital to the global economy. And a lot of people are intimidated by it. So if anything, I'd say not only get into business journalism, but also brush up, take courses, sure, get your MBA. That would be fantastic, but really learn as much as you can, because when a crisis hits, and not only do crises hit, they're like waves sometimes right after each other, and they're very complex, complicated, little understood things to know, and you may be the voice. You want to be correct, you want to provide context, you want to make it understandable. So I say yes, it's something that's absolutely important, and maybe more important as the world has become so interconnected that we don't always understand what's happening in the US, never mind what's happening, say, in the second biggest economy, China.
It's a touchstone. You don't feel kind of cast out into the work world. You have maybe a group that understands you a little bit better than perhaps people who don't work in the financial or business sections of publications, or as columnists or bloggers or videographers or whatnot. I, for one, as a young journalist, joined the board of governors for the financial writers. I became president. At the time, I was the youngest president in the organization's history. And I'll tell you, there are a lot of times where I'm in leadership roles now as a managing editor of a publication, and having been an editor at some of the largest news organizations, one of the largest news organizations in the world. I often think back, if I've got a situation where I have to make decisions, or I have to, do my leadership thing. It's a poor way of saying it, but being the leader and editing and leading people and telling them, look, we need to go in this direction, or how do you feel about that? A lot of it, I say to myself, where did I come up with that? Or how did I have that experience where it doesn't feel so uncomfortable? In fact, it feels more comfortable. I find myself coming back to the financial writers. You know what it's like trying to herd 16 volunteer journalists into an organization that produces scholarships of $30,000 or $40,000 a year and puts on the Financial Follies, and at a time when we did a second dinner and speakers and luncheons. There are a few places where you can get that kind of experience, and all you got to do is raise your hand and say, hey, I want to be a part of this.
I've been a member of this organization since 1975. Don't make me do the higher mathematics, but that's a lot of decades. So yeah, I feel loyal, and I love the association.